Hi there audience, this is Blastoise Animator, and I'm sure you guys have no clue what is going on in the Fire vs. Water storyline. But don't worry, because I am going to explain the entire lore. Real quick, this whole story involves war, so if you're not keen on that, don't listen. There's also stuff that is much, much worse. So, if you're not keen on that, once again, please leave. Okay, so it starts in the 2010s. That's basically when Unova was getting big for Flipno-Hetina. However, this particular region is never revealed but is portrayed to be the combination of the Southwest and Midwest US. So, kinda like Unova. But from that year forward, this region would not be known for its large population of Pokemon, but the events that followed. So the professor of this region is Francisco Poplar, and what makes him stand out from all the other regional professors is the fact that he experiments on Pokemon. What interests him is how he can strengthen the bond between people and Pokemon. And the best way to do that, he thinks, is injecting human DNA in them. However, all it does was make them learn how to speak like humans, meaning they abandon Pokespeak, like Meowth, Lucario, and Mewtwo, and some of the feral creatures can learn to walk upright, like most people, at a faster rate. But this all wasn't enough to satisfy Francisco, so he decided to go higher and experiment on the ancient Pokemon Mew. But wait, you ask, how in the hell did Francisco manage to get his hands on a Mew of all Pokemon? And the answer is this. The region's government did allow for all other regions' professors to communicate with one another, and every once in a while keep track of Pokemon life sustainability and all that stuff. Francisco, he kinda bribed others to literally ship Pokemon out of their region. In fact, that is technically revealed in my video for Dirty Art Club's Monophobia. If you read the captions, you would find out that the lyrics to the song changed, and one that stands out is, "Now that you are no longer lading," which is a mixture of the stanzas from the song sample, "Now that you no longer love me, and now the warmth of love is fading." And lading means to ship cargo. Yep, Francisco Poplar had some Pokemon from other regions literally shipped out of theirs to the current one. So yeah, Francisco Poplar decided one Mew wasn't enough, but since there are technically only one of these in existence, he decides to clone it, and after months on working on cloning the ancient Pokemon, he's successful, as far as he knows. But there is one other thing he wants to do. He wants there to be more than one Mew for all eternity, and he hopes he doesn't have to clone them all. So instead, he decides to literally make them male and female. Yep, we're going there. So while he works on the female Mew to make sure she survives, Francisco eventually finds out that the region caught on with his experimentation, so he flat out admits it and then reveals he's cloning a Mew, hopefully to excite all aspiring trainers. But since he's literally genetically altering the ancient Pokemon, this tarnished his image, and people were demanding that he stop experimenting and step down as professor. Francisco decides that it's technically the end of his life, and apparently was planning for it too, because in some professor log entries found in Fire vs. Water 4 regional perspective, he also spent time in 2012 building a cryogenic fridge out of his lab sample fridge to keep the Mew clones safe. It's also worth mentioning that the Mew's name is Pinky, at least the female one. The male one's name is not known yet. Francisco makes a resigning speech and basically forces his son to replace him, mostly out of spite. Francisco didn't really care for his family while he was trying to become the region's professor. He even disliked his own son enough to name him after the prison Alcatraz. Francisco vanishes without a trace, but in his log entries it's revealed he committed suicide. After that, we got Alcatraz Poplar. Alcatraz Poplar was informed of his father's crazy antics and was forced to become professor. Alcatraz decided to do it anyway and try to calm down the angry Pokemon trainers and animal rights groups, saying that he's not going to proceed with any of his father's experiments. But that's not enough to suppress the angry region. In fact, this led to the formation of an anti-Pokemon organization. It was dubbed the Anti-Pokemon Mafia, but it became cult-like because of its leader, Gabe White, or Alphonse, or Al as his nickname. Gabe had a vision that Francisco and Alcatraz's tarnished Pokemon would cause the end of the world, and those who listened to Gabe actually believed him, and they decided to do something about it before anyone else. Now, I never actually revealed whether or not Gabe forced this, but the anti-Pokemon group was planning to break into the professor's lab and destroy anything they could find, including the lab itself. This plan was overheard by a Pokemon ranger named Clementine Russell and warned Alcatraz about the impending attack, and even helped him escape, but they left the cryogenic fridge, thinking that Francisco had already tortured the ancient Pokemon enough. But when the Mafia manages to infiltrate and destroy the lab, the cryogenic fridge is left unscathed. Gabe did not show up on the day it happened, and Alcatraz was presumed dead. Now, on the day of the lab attack, Alcatraz and Clementine actually attended a show where they watched a series of performances. Clementine films Alcatraz seen in the visualizer's basement seance, Sick Boy, and Into the Spiritual. However, at this point, the pair were not married. In fact, Clementine was already pregnant with her first and only son, but her husband decided to not be a father and just leave her behind, leaving Alcatraz Poplar to become the stepfather. As for the Mafia, those responsible for the lab attack did face vandalism charges, but Gabe denies any responsibility, but was sentenced to only 5 years in jail. But less than a year later, he was bailed out by a close friend of his. More on him later. Despite this, Gabe still keeps his job as a construction manager amid all the bad things he's done. It's also worth mentioning Gabe's life was full of hate. Coming from the southern US, he was mostly racist. But that's not going to be a big problem, right? So after all of this, Alcatraz Poplar wanted to keep a low profile, and Clementine made the decision to birth Casper at home. Casper managed to be born a healthy African-American baby boy, and for the later years of his life, he grew up mostly isolated, until Clementine sent him to daycare. But because Alcatraz and Clementine lived in an isolated part of the region, there were strange routes that needed to be taken to drop Casper off and pick Casper up. Because of this, Casper was technically forced to make friends by his teachers since they assumed his family is isolated, but by 2019, Alcatraz Poplar decided to change. He decided it was time to go out of hiding and try to live a better life. He also decided that's when Casper should reveal to all of his friends at school that he is the son of the professor, and that Alcatraz Poplar is still alive. And when that happens, Casper was automatically the cool kid, and people didn't seem to care whether or not Alcatraz Poplar was going to continue Francisco Poplar's experiments. Now, one of Casper's new friends were these two, Marcus Dustin and Esperanza Lopez. Esperanza has a Pikachu and a Spikey-Eared Pichu, and her family recently moved out of a Mexican region. Wink wink. Marcus Dustin has no Pokemon but wishes to capture a Marshadow. Wink wink. But Pokemon training is kinda hard for him, considering he takes karate classes outside of school. When winter rolled around, Casper, Marcus, and Esperanza all agreed to start their own Pokemon team following spring of 2020. And luckily for Casper, he gets his first Pokeball on Christmas. But if you know this part of the story, you would know there is a disaster. Casper's story is revealed in various Fire vs. Water books and is kinda the crucial part of the whole story. Specifically in my video December 2019, we can see Casper's journey. To sum it up, Casper left his home when Alcatraz and Clementine were asleep and left the isolated estate to capture Pokemon, but got lost and also lost his Pokeball and nearly froze to death. All hope was lost until a red pickup truck stopped and the driver asked what was going on. Casper explained he was just trying to find Pokemon and decided to capture some and then go back home. The man in the pickup decided to take him to his house to let him keep some of his. Casper hopped in the pickup and prepared for the ride. The man who picked him up in the cold winter night was Gabe White. And like we said before, Gabe, a white elder, was taught to avoid other races. And Casper is African American. When Gabe finally drops off Casper to his place, he tells the child that all of them sleep in his basement. When Casper goes downstairs to see them, he's greeted with a dark room and asks, "Where's the Pokemon?" Moments later, he's shot in the back of the head with a double-barreled shotgun. His death is shown partially in Chase Goes to School during Jack's nightmare. So, Gabe shoots his second round at Casper for good measure, or just pure sadism and hatred for Casper's race, then disposes of his body and also drowns him with a heavy object to make sure nobody discovers him. But little does he know, Casper technically is still alive. Seen in the visualizer Ghost of the Night Tide, Casper wanders out of the river, realizing he was murdered and now is a Gengar. He tragically tried to make his way back home, but yet again gets lost. Regretting his choices, he discovers a man is walking towards a familiar red pickup truck. He follows it and realizes that's the man who lured him to his death, and he's joining some kind of meeting. Casper, now a Gengar, starts practicing the many abilities he can learn as Gengar. So after killing some guards, he snuck into the meeting area of the anti-Pokemon Mafia, the cult that Gabe was leading, and finds that they were partying and preparing for their next mission. Of course, this party was technically stalling / distracting the Mafia members since they haven't heard from the professor in a long time, and Gabe doesn't have an excuse for another mission. Also revealed in Chase Goes to School, Casper haunted the whole building, tampered with its water supply, trapped them, and flooded it, hoping that Gabe and everyone else he's brainwashing all drowns like how he did to him. Unfortunately, only a handful of members drowned. Gabe survived, as well as many others. So by the late morning of December 26, 2022, Clementine and Alcatraz find out that Casper snuck out of the house and lost his Pokeball in the process. When they tried contacting authorities, it was too late. His body was discovered, and Alcatraz ultimately decided it was now or never to come out of hiding. He and Clementine finally addressed the statement, claiming their son was murdered by a man who tried to kill Alcatraz Poplar, all because his father did some sadistic experiments on Pokemon. Now, the region's views on Alcatraz were divided, but since a literal child died, they ultimately decided to give him and Clementine all the support and funds necessary for a funeral. However, this wouldn't be a private family funeral. This one was public and was requested to be broadcasted to tell the region what was going on, and we see part of the result in Casper's funeral video. Also revealed in here, Clementine Russell, who is a North Carolina native, asked Pulitzer Prize winner Caroline Shaw in her ensemble, Roomful of Teeth, to perform since she, Alcatraz, and Casper liked her music. Shaw denied, but allowed for her to play a recording of her song or have a choir perform it. So that explains why Alaman from Partita for 8 Voices is common in most of my visualizers. But anyway, Casper still lost, eventually heard the familiar music, and found out about his own funeral. He sees himself and all of his friends and family mourning for him, and it gives him yet another existential crisis. However, during the funeral, Casper finds out it was time to leave by orders from Arceus. He decided not to and haunted the broadcasting footage, and he manages to plug his memory into the video with the music still playing. He also takes time to literally reveal who was responsible, Gabriel White. So after the funeral, the attendees were unaware that Casper showed up. However, instead of going back home to his parents, he followed one of his only friends, Marcus. Marcus's short story does reveal that Marcus was in grief just like his friend's parents. However, at the end, Casper does reveal that he is okay, as a Gengar at least, and he wants him and Esperanza to make sure Pokemon are safe because he was learning the horrible truth. It turns out, Casper is not the first child Gabe has killed. Gabe manages to get away scot-free by challenging Pokemon trainers, letting his Charizard overwhelm the opponent, and murdering the trainers himself. His Charizard would eventually cremate the body, and one of these kids met this exact fate. His name is Juno Bartholomew, and Juno had a close relationship with the Squirtle too. Said Squirtle is named after Juno, and he will thankfully be captured and adopted by another child after losing his first trainer. Juno Bartholomew Jr., the Squirtle, is the Blastoise you see on my profile picture. Now, Gabe has a lot of dead kids to his name, but he decides to take advantage of his infamy by claiming that he and his team will keep going, but will stop if, and only if, they lost a battle to end all battles. But seeing how not only did the police get involved, but especially the military, the region immediately assumed this was some kind of Civil War declaration. And when Gabe finds out about that, he immediately tells his followers to relocate to a specific building in a rural, isolated part of the region by January of 2020. Now before the anti-Pokemon cult members relocate, Gabe teams up with 2 other members named Baker Caitlin and Kelly Bartlett to start a forest fire to help kill all Pokemon living there. Baker and Kelly are armed with bows and arrows, while Gabe has his shotgun and his Charizard. The fire managed to kill almost every wildlife creature, except for one, a Cubone named George Osteo, also known as Geo. Geo was forced to flee by orders of his mom, and while doing that, she was literally murdered in front of his eyes. Geo managed to hide and survive the fire. He finds his mom's skull and, by nature, has to wear it. Now, this is the start of Fire vs. Water 2, Maternal Bonds, but before I can go on, I wanted to outline some important details for all Fire vs. Water books. After Casper's funeral, Clementine and Alcatraz made the heartbreaking decision to divorce, and Clementine moved back to her hometown in North Carolina. Alcatraz would live in an empty neighborhood home and continue experimenting while also trying to find Pokemon himself. All he can find were shiny Chestnut, Quilladin, and Chespin. These three in particular were exported out of Francisco's homeland, Italy. So he names the family the Alcatraz family and gives each Pokemon a name. Chester for the Chestnut, Carolyn for the Quilladin, and Johnny for the Chespin. And that is Jack. And thankfully, they also learn how to speak English easily.